Hi, my name is Leah Day, and welcome to this video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Today we are going to be piecing our next block. We're going to be working on a 9-patch this month and learning lots of cool ways of free motion quilting this block, but first we've got to piece 3 of these. So we're going to learn strip piecing today. It's a method of putting long strips together and then cutting them up to create our pieced units, and then putting those together in order to create our finished block. So there's going to be a lot of steps to this video, so follow along step by step, and of course remember to download your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern at leahday.com, so that way you have all the requirements for fabric cutting, so that way you know what you need to cut in order to make this block. So let's get started. So here is what our block is going to look like at the very end, and I want to emphasize our 9-patch is the center, and then we're going to be piecing on the extra borders. So keep that in mind. Whenever you're piecing the 9-patch itself, it's going to be quite a bit smaller than what our finished 10-inch block is going to be. So let's see the materials we're going to need for this, what we're going to get started with. We are going to need some long strips. This is what strip piecing is all about. You need some long strips for this. And so basically you're going to need 2 of each color, your A fabric and your B fabric. Take 1 of the strips of A and 1 of the strips of B and lay these aside. These are going to be the ones that are sewn together as long strips. Your second strips of A and B, slice them in half. So they're half the length, and you're actually not going to need 1 of these. So I'm just going to set that aside. I don't need it. Put this in your scrap bin, these extra 2 pieces, put these in your scrap bin and save them. You might need them later if something gets messed up or whatever. Or you can piece some of your quilt backs if you want to. Some of your block backs. Okay, so we're going to be working with the 2 long strips to start. And here's a tip. I do not pin my strips together, because if you hold them together from the beginning, what you might find is that there might not be exactly the same length. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But the simple fact of the matter is, most of the time they aren't. Trying to force these 2 strips to be the exact same length is going to cause some stretching and skewing, so don't do that. This is what I do instead. I just simply layer the 2 pieces together very carefully so that edge is aligned right at the beginning. I don't worry about aligning the whole thing. This is way too long to be aligning the whole thing before you take it to the sewing machine. Instead, just get this first top in part aligned. Now take it to the sewing machine and let's get started. Okay, so I've got these 2 pieces nicely aligned here, and I was noticing I had some glare on my sewing machine right here, which is why I put the masking tape on the machine. But then I thought, well, you know, that masking tape's there. It might be a kind of a nice thing to just create a little guide for my piecing. So I just took a straight edge, and I never have a ruler right here. So I just took the edge of my needles and set it up against that piecing foot. And I just drew a straight line coming straight down off of that, and that has given me a nice little guide to also use to line up my blocks. Now, I have never done this before, but I'm using it right now, so you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it might be helpful. It might be one little extra tip that helps you keep things in good alignment. Okay, so I'm going to lift my presser foot ever so slightly and begin stitching onto these 2 strips, and I'm just keeping these in alignment. I'm using that little mark. That's kind of helpful. I've never done that before, so it's one of those nice things. You know, I have to change things up a little bit for filming. That's one of those things that I had to change, but it's kind of nice to find something that also makes the process easier, makes piecing a little bit easier. Okay, so I want to really emphasize how I'm holding these strips. Notice I didn't pin them together. I'm keeping this top strip loose because I like to just keep it loose and then gently place it down onto the fabric in alignment, and then let the machine bring it underneath the foot. I'm letting the machine bring these 2 pieces together. In my experience with strip piecing, I have found a lot of stretching and skewing can happen with long strips. The simple fact of the matter is these are fairly delicate. And we need to be really cautious about trying to, pin them in place or stretch them out, that kind of thing. We want to be really careful with them, because if you start getting off with your strips and you're strip piecing a big quilt, everything's going to be off from the very, very first pieces. So just really watch out for that. So I'm just going to continue just gently bringing this down. I'm not pulling, I'm letting the fabrics come together. And I'm kind of putting some pressure with my fingertips downward. I'm not pulling out, I'm just putting some pressure downward just to keep those two pieces in perfect alignment. And that is really all you need to do. I find with sewing, so much of the detail is in the fine movements of your hands, of how you hold the fabric, of how you touch the fabric. Pulling, tugging, you've really got to watch that. You've got to watch the way that you're handling it, because that really will determine how your blocks come out. It's a subtle thing, but it's an important thing. Okay, so I'm going to just continue working down this strip, and I'll meet you back here when we're ready for the next step. Here's a quick little story that kind of emphasizes the gentleness that I want you to bring to strip piecing. I had a friend that had two babies pretty close together, kind of back to back, and her older child, of course, was kind of rougher with this new baby, and so her mantra, my friend's mantra, became gentle, gentle. She was always telling her toddler, just be gentle, gentle. So that kind of helps you, have something to think about as you're piecing these long strips together. Just think gentle. Be very, very gentle and delicate with these fabrics. I feel that long strips are almost kind of like working with bias. Anything on the bias, you can easily stretch it completely out of shape. Just be gentle with it, and it's going to be quite forgiving. But if you start getting rough with it, pinning things, stretching, skewing things into place, it's not going to forgive you. It's going to go all ripply and wrinkly, and nothing's going to match. So just watch out for that. At this point, you should have your nice long strip all pieced together, and I'm just going to hold this end to end and just kind of stretch it out like this. And then you've got a fold then. It's folded in half, and I'm just going to grab a pair of scissors and slice this in half. That simple. You don't need to take this to your rotary mat or anything. We're going to have plenty of fabric from these strips, so don't worry about anything like that. You also don't need to go and press this yet. We're going to press this after we have our full strip units together. So at this point, you've got two pieces that are an A and a B that look like this. Now go grab your other long strips. So here we go. We've got our other half-length strips, and this is one of my A and B units. I'm going to take this one and place it to this side, so that way I have an A, B, A, and I'm going to go on ahead and piece these together, just running my seam along this edge, and then I'll open up the second one. This is going to be my BAB. So here we go. I've got my B fabric. I've got my B strip, A strip, B strip. Again, layer it together. Very carefully align one end. It doesn't matter which end, but just carefully align those fabrics. Again, don't pen it, don't stretch it, don't pass go, don't collect $2,000. Just get this aligned, take it to your sewing machine, and start stitching. Okay, so here are our two strip piece units, and you can see I've already started the process of opening these seam allowances. So I'm going to start that here too. You really want to do this with your hands to start. Just kind of get your fingers in there and start gently pressing open those seam allowances. If you want to kind of run your fingernail a little bit against it, that's fine too. But what you don't want to do is take this to your ironing board and try to force these seam allowances open with the tip of your iron. What's going to happen if you do that, and you know who you are if you don't do that, what's going to happen is the tip of your iron is going to kind of come in here, and you're going to start pressing pretty hard, and you're going to start really stretching your fabric out as you open up that seam allowance. All it takes is about a minute to just run your fingers through the seam, press it open, and then you're ready to take it to the ironing board and hit it with your iron and get everything nicely open completely. So just take your time with that. I'm going to go hit these, and then we're going to be ready to start cutting units from these strips in order to make our 9 patches. Okay, we are ready to go cutting up our BAB strip, and we need 6 pieces cut out of this in order to be able to piece 3 9-patch blocks. And with cutting, I'm always talking about what lines you can trust, or what lines you should cut against. And what that means is, what line on this strip should we line up with our ruler, so that we have the best chance of the most accurate cut, and have everything come out and match together as we piece this together. So a lot of people might align to the edges, the top or the bottom edges, and line that up with the line on the ruler. I don't like to do that, because I find that these lines have been pieced and they should be straight. If no stretching or skewing has happened while you piece them, they should be straight. So I trust these lines. So whenever I'm lining my ruler up, I use the thinner lines on my ruler. I don't particularly like the thick lines, because I find them a little too chunky to be able to really see how the things are lining up. So when I align this, I am making sure that I've got a line running straight across this top bar, and that seam line, and I'm making sure I've got a line lined up with that other seam line. So those two are straight. I don't really care what's going on up here or down here. That could have gotten wibbly wobbly, but these 2 lines are straight. Then that means if I cut my other strip straight too, then these pieces should come together and the seam should match perfectly. Okay, so I am left-handed. I'm going to cut this left-handed by trimming first. And if you're left-handed too, you'll need to do this. Go on ahead and flip it, and then now you can start cutting your pieces. Now line this up. Now again, and so you saw me trim first, and that squared the edge, and now I'm going to make my first cut. So just make sure everything's in alignment. At this point, because you've got a trimmed edge, you're aligning not only that trimmed edge, but also a line with that top seam line and a line on the ruler with that bottom seam line. So you've got 3 ways to line this up and make sure it's dead on. And that is how you get a very nice, accurate cut. Okay, so I'm just going to cut these down the line. And here I am cutting left-handed, but I'm going to cut the other strip right-handed, so that way our righties and lefties are both taken care of. One of the things, the skills that's very nice to gain as you get into quilting is the ability to cut with both hands. It just saves some time and flipping the fabric around and stuff. And it's one of those things, kind of equally good at left and right-handed cutting. So it's just one of those nice skills. If you're kind of bored and want to start cutting a lot of fabric, just practice cutting with your non-dominant hand. It's fun. Okay, I'm almost finished up with this one. Alright, so here's the situation. This is really important that this happen. All of a sudden I cannot align everything perfectly. I'm getting kind of off on this bottom line. So what do? In that situation, go ahead and take your strip and flip it. Bring your ruler back a little bit. And I'm always aligning the full length of my ruler on the strip. I do this the same way with fabric too. You want to make sure that that edge is square. And so putting more of your ruler on the fabric, really, it aligns it better. If I'm squaring up way over here, well, I'm only squaring those itsy bitsy tiny little lines. I don't have very much space to really know if that's straight or not. So I'm aligning my ruler over here, making sure I've got a nice skinny line lined up with both of those seam lines. And I make my cut. It might not have been very far off, but just visually I was not seeing a good alignment there, so it needed to change. And you got to be careful with these 12.5-inch rulers. Sometimes you can, oh, that's why I need to flip it.
you have that extra 1/2 inch all around, and you need to be careful to make sure that you're cutting accurately and you're not cutting a 1/2 inch too small. A 1/2 inch too big is a-okay because you could just cut it down later. But a 1/2 inch too small, you have to go and cut it again. You need 6 cuts out of this piece. So I'm going to finish this up, and then we're going to cut the ABA strip, and I'm going to cut that one right-handed. Okay, here we go. So cutting right-handed, basically identical to cutting left-handed. Same thing we're going to do, lining the length of our ruler up so that we have a thin line on one of the top seam line, and a thin line on that bottom seam line. We only need 3 pieces out of this. Hold that ruler firmly down and make your cut with your right hand. Okay, now in order to keep cutting with your right hand, you've got to flip out the fabric and align your mark. And just double check your pattern for the width of these strips, so that way you're sure that you're cutting the right width. And again, I'm lining that straight edge we just trimmed up, we squared, and a thin line and a thin line. That looks good. Press and cut. And you'll know if things get off, like if you start finding that you can align the end, but maybe not one of these seam lines, then that seam line might have kind of wibbled in and out of being accurate 1/4 inch. It's one of those things where you can kind of check yourself and know if things are accurate or not. And you are going to have quite a lot of leftover strip for this color, for the ABA. So if you mess something up or something's not quite right, you can always cut yourself an extra strip if you need to. Okay, so that was right and left-handed cutting. This is extra. Just save it in your scrap box. Along with this piece too, if something gets totally messed up or the quilting just is awful on one of the blocks, you can easily piece an extra one and have that ready to go. So now let's construct our blocks. I'm going to clean this place up a little bit so that way we can see. So these 3 blocks are identical in that 9-patch checkerboard pattern, just like this. And we save time with this strip piecing method because the first thing we save time on, we did not have to cut out each individual little square. That saves cutting time. The second thing we've saved time on is aligning, getting the fabrics together in these subunits. We save time by having everything strip pieced and cutting it down. It's all nice and accurate. So we're ready to put these blocks together. So it's a very, very simple process. Just simply layer this piece on top of this piece. We can sew those together. Then we will take that unit and attach this unit. We'll have all 3 placed together. And you can, if you have all these in a line, you can just kind of flip up all the way down the line. Take all 3 of these to your sewing machine and just chain piece through all 3. Then take them off, grab these, and chain piece those on as well. So it's a very, very simple process. So I'm going to get started piecing these together. Okay, so for matching up these seams, it's basically the exact same process as with the 4-patch block we learned last month. You're going to be pinching with my finger and my thumb to get these nicely secured together. I'm aligning to make sure I've got that seam line perfectly aligned, and I'm making sure also the edge of the 2 fabrics are coming just right together. And place that pin just like that. I'm placing it kind of in that seam allowance so it's off the actual stitching line, but it's definitely going to hold those securely together. I do the same thing with the next piece. Kind of pinching, pulling it down, making sure everything's aligned. and giving it a pen. And what you can do is just sit here and get all these prepped and ready to go, and then you can chain piece these, which basically just means send this through your machine, and then as we get to the end, we're going to have the next one ready to go and send it in through right behind it. Make sure that those seam allowances don't lip up on you on the back. We like to do that. I like to take the pins out at the very last minute so that way things don't get out of alignment. Okay, chain piecing. At this point, I'll grab my next pieces. I'll just leave the needle down, get my next pieces ready to go. Lift that presser foot ever so slightly and slide the pieces underneath and start stitching. Okay, so those are our 3 pieces chain pieced together, and they're just going to have these little kind of thread chains that are left in between. You want to just clip them. And this is part of the reason why you don't have to backstitch your seams on the ends. Everything is held really nice and tight together, and of course if you're also lowered your stitch length to 1.5 millimeters, it's going to work out just fine too. It's going to be a really nice solid seam. So you can just kind of open this up and check your seam your matches right here where these seam lines come together. Make sure everything looks good, and then grab your next piece. And you're basically just going to repeat that same set of steps. And one thing you want to make sure of, you want to make sure you put your BAB piece next to that middle ABA piece, so that way if you do it the opposite way, it's going to be kind of obvious. It's going to be like that. So you want to watch out for that. Make sure that you're aligning everything up on the end, and do the same thing. We're going to align these together, pinch, pen, and then stitch that seam. Okay, so at this point you should have 3 of these little 9 patches. Again, flip it over on the back and use your fingers to open up these seams and finger press this open. You definitely don't want to try and open this with the tip of your iron. It's not going to be very good for the block. So give this a little finger press and then hit it with your iron. It's going to be nice and flat and ready to go. And then it's going to be time to add the extra borders on the outside edges, so that way you make your block the full size that needs to be for quilting. So what we're going to do is take these short little B strips and go ahead and sew them to the top and bottom of the block. Press those seams open, and then place these longer strips to both sides. Again, stitch through these seams the full length, press the seams open, and your block will be ready to go. So that's it for piecing a 9-patch block. We have learned strip piecing and gotten lots of tips on dealing with those long strips, and also a little bit about chain piecing, running through a piece and then kind of leaving our machine ready to go with the needle down, lifting the presser foot slightly and sliding that next piece in, and stitching through in a chain so that everything goes through very, very quickly. This is time saving in the sense that you didn't have to cut out all those individual pieces, all the 9 pieces of the block, and put them all together individually. However, it's not speed demon stuff. You want to take your time and be very gentle as you strip piece. I see a lot of strip piece quilts, and I hear a lot about strip piece quilts being not nearly as kind of matchy-matchy. The ability of matching those seams is kind of limited.
And I think the main reason is that we're working with strips way too roughly, and not having that accuracy come in. That comes from taking a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra caution when working with these extra long strips. So be gentle. Remember that. Be gentle. And I'm sure you're going to be able to piece amazing quilts using strips. So definitely piece up your 9 patch blocks. You need 3 of them this month. We're going to learn 3 different awesome ways of free motion quilting this block. So I hope that you'll join me for that. My name is Leah Day, and this has been a video for the Building Blocks Quilt Along. Find your copy of the Building Blocks quilt pattern at leahday.com and come piece and free motion quilt with us through the entire year of 2014. Until next time, let's go quilt.